Greetings, Grant Diggles with Health Professionals Alliance and your host of The Real Docs Show. If you like the show, we invite you to subscribe to the show on YouTube, hit that notification button so that you stay up to date with series and episodes and topics that apply to you and bring you value. We also encourage you, if you're interested in the HPA model, we have a message for you. Don't get consolidated. Instead, join the HPA family with other independent practices and groups across the country in both medical and dental. Protect your independence, control your patient care, thrive in the market, and build your wealth. For more information about being part of this exciting movement across the country, you want to protect that independence and thrive in the market, visit us at www.hpamembers.com. If you're interested in reaching out to HPA, in the description section below this video, you can actually click on a link to fill out an indication of interest form that will get us in touch with you so we can talk with you about the real value propositions that we bring to our members at HPA. Now, I'm really excited about this show because it covers a topic that is very applicable in both the medical and dental arenas. And we're talking about the topic of doctors getting sued. And today we're going to be talking with a guest that is an expert in this field, covering the topic of not getting sued, but also what can you do to prevent getting sued in the future? Because I think we all think it's not going to happen to me until it happens to us. So without further ado, let's get the show started. We are talking with Chris Verbiest with a ton of experience on the topic that we are covering today, called Why Doctors Get Sued and How to Prevent It from Happening to You. It's a real honor and opportunity to have Chris on the show. Chris, thank you for joining us today on The Real Doc Show. We're covering a real topic here and bringing, I think, some real solutions about something that I think is always kind of sitting in the back end of a doctor's mind about malpractice. And, you know, it's just part of the industry, right? If you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and then we're going to jump into the content here. Well, it's great to be with you, Grant. Thank you so much for having me. So I've been serving dentists in malpractice insurance and risk management since 1998. So I've had a number of years of experience to it. Primarily, my client base is in the Northwest. However, I have worked in other states as well. I've lectured at dental schools in Oregon, Washington, Tennessee, Arizona. I actually had the opportunity, and it was a lot of fun to do a lecture at the American Dental Association's annual conference in Washington, D.C. a few years ago. Wow. So I've had a lot of experience in working with dentists in risk management and claims issues. And hopefully I can be of some help to you today. By the way, I think there is some crossover about what we're going to talk today between physicians and dentists. But to be for full disclosure, I have worked exclusively with dentists. In the conversation we were having, kind of preparing for this show, I'm like, these are all things that really apply to both verticals. So I know that if there's medical people watching this right now, there's a whole lot of takeaways on this that apply really to both industries. So I appreciate you saying that. So I know that with your experience and how long you've done this, you have seen a lot of things. And it sounds like you've been in this a lot of years. I mean, how long has this been for you? Well, I took over a company that did dental malpractice called Dentist Benefits Insurance Company in late 1997. Okay. And I've been doing risk management and malpractice insurance for dentists ever since. So is that 23 years, whatever. That's a long time. I've never done anything that long. Well, you know, I didn't think I would either, but here I am. Here you are. And again, an honor to have you on the show. So what I wanted to find out from you to start out with is kind of setting the stage for this show is how many doctors are actually being sued out there? Are there any statistics that kind of support any findings that suggest that this should be a concern for everybody?
Well, it certainly should be a concern because the cost of lawsuits and litigation is rising dramatically. The statistics available are all pre-COVID. The indemnity or judgment or settlement of malpractice claims in dentistry rose dramatically for claims between 10,000 and 100,000 from 2016 to 2020. The large claims, which we would classify as $250,000 to $750,000, doubled from 2016 to 2020. So again, pre-COVID, severity of claims were growing dramatically.
You know, when we talk about situations with lawsuits and dentists and kind of what's coming up, I know you've seen a lot of different things, and I've talked to you. You have some really unique stories. Some of them we can't tell on the show, which is fine. But outside of the uniqueness of those stories, there's probably certain trends that occur with medical malpractice or malpractice for dental lawsuits that kind of like, hey, these are the most prevalent things that you've seen in the market that dentists are getting sued for. And so my question is there a by and large, like this is like the number one reason that dentists are getting sued? Do you have any comments on that? Like what you've seen in your career since 1997 and 20 plus years of experience?
Oh, sure. Well, generally I do these classes for 3 hours, so this is a condensed version. But to briefly go over it, there are what I call three pillars of risk management.
Okay.
Communication, documentation, and informed consent. And documentation and informed consent are linked very close together. The bottom line with communication is if the patient likes you, they're less likely to sue you. There was a really interesting article in the Wall Street Journal a number of years back. And granted, it was written about physicians, not dentists, but I think there's a parallel there. And I don't remember the statistics, and they'd be outdated now. But the moral of the whole article was, if you treat the patient right, if you listen to patient concerns, if the patient trusts you and likes you, they are far less likely to sue you. And I believe that's absolutely true.
So in layman's terms, be likable. Relationships with the patients are that important that even in a catastrophic situation where like clearly a decision was wrong on the dentist side, you've actually seen patients who have had every opportunity at that point justifiably to sue that dentist, and yet they've not decided to do it because they feel connected to that dentist. Is that basically the simplicity of it?
You know, I can explain this with a quick story.
Okay. We love stories.
So I had a client one time, and this dentist was a generational dentist for this family, meaning he insured the grandfather, the father, and the grandson. So John Doe Jr., and John Doe III. So unfortunately, the doctor kept all of the patient records in one chart note, which is a big no-no, but he did. So the grandfather was scheduled to have a tooth extraction. Well, I don't know if it was the dentist or the hygienist, but they pulled out the chart of the grandson. And as a result, the dentist extracted a virgin tooth.
Oh, man.
Now, I don't think anybody listening would say that's not negligence. It's a clear matter of malpractice. The dentist admitted the problem. The dentist was going to fix the problem via implant and restoration of the implant.
Okay.
And was very apologetic towards the family. Now, he had been a trusted provider for this family for 3 generations. Clearly, he could have gotten sued. And he didn't.
Yep.
He didn't.
Wow.
You know, there's a dentist I know on the East Coast. He does a lot of expert witness on behalf of dentists. And I love this quote that he says. He says, the biggest problem with patient communication is the misconception that it took place. So in the dentist's mind, they're communicating very openly and effectively with the patient, but the patient doesn't see it like that. And that's where we get into trouble. In that same study with the Wall Street Journal, it was a very interesting point was made. The patient satisfaction, the quality and of treatment that was done was based on the quality and effectiveness of the communication by the dentist or the physician in this case. So the patient's assessment of their clinical treatment was largely based on whether they liked you or not.
Yeah, you did tell me, you told me a story, and I love stories. And the thing that I love about you, Chris, is you have lots and lots of stories. You've seen.
How much time do we have?
I was going to say, you've probably had many times in your life where you think, okay, I've seen it all now. And then the next thing that comes up, you're like, oh, this is a new one. And so, I mean, obviously the relationship with the patient and the doctor is very paramount in building trust and also leading to the decisions on the patients. But one of the things that you mentioned when we talked about this was, I love this story. And it's the story as an example of a dentist that's getting sued, right? And then they go into the courtroom, and then the lawyer for the patient asks this dentist a variety of questions, right? Because you're talking about the importance of paperwork, right? Having a paper trail, making sure you document everything. This one really stuck out to me. So could you tell me that story, or tell the audience? I've heard the story, but I want the audience to hear the story of what kind of questions do patients' lawyers ask in a suit that makes the paper trail of a dental office or even a physician's office so important?
Well, what the lawyer is going to try to do in the questions they ask is they're going to show a couple of things. Either the dentist rushed through the treatment and didn't listen to patient concerns. B, the provider didn't fully explain the procedures being done or the treatment being done, so there was an informed consent issue. C, it was the treatment didn't meet expectations. So okay. in this particular case that you're talking about, the chart that the dentist did was incomplete. And in documentation with physicians and dentists, well, I'll say a dentist because I don't know about physicians. A lot of times charting is sparse.
Really?
And what some dentists may not understand is it's the number one tool for defense that they will have if they get sued.
Yeah, kind of like that idea is like if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist, right?
Absolutely. If it's not in writing, it didn't happen. And by the way, a dentist never knows who's going to sue him. I have had staff sue dentists. We had one lawsuit, the dentist's son-in-law sued him. The chart that the dentist had was missing some crucial information. And what happens then is the jury gets to hear the opinion of the dentist. So the dentist will testify as to what he or she believes happened. And then the patient will testify on what their recollection is. Yep. So there's no chart note to back up the dentist's testimony. So now what you have is a he said, she said. And so the attorney for the plaintiff or the patient, when he has the doctor on the stand, he's going to ask him something like this. So pretend I'm the attorney cross-examining the dentist. And I'm going to start something like this. Doctor, how many patients do you have in your practice? Well, I have 2,000 patients. Wow, you're a busy guy and a successful guy. Congratulations. So tell me, doctor, how many of those 2,000 patients have you treated since February 8th of 2021 and now April 11th of 2022? It takes a year and a half to get to trial.
Yep.
So tell me, doctor, how many of those patients have you treated in this time frame? Well, golly, I don't know. I'll bet you I've treated, at least 1,500 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, you're a busy guy. So tell me, doctor, is it possible, just possible, that my client, your former patient, might have a better recollection of what happened in the chair that day, given the fact now under testimony, under oath, you've testified that you've treated 1,500 patients since that incident. And the fact that my client, your former patient, was so traumatized by what happened in the chair that day that she hasn't gone back to the dentist since. Is it possible, doctor, she might have a better recollection of what happened that day? Of course, the answer to that is who knows? You can't say, but it's a fairly compelling argument to the jury.
Yep.
And remember, while it's true, plaintiff has to prove negligence. Okay, the defendant, the doctor, does not have to prove they didn't commit malpractice. The plaintiff legally has to prove they did. But all what they really have to do is get the jury to side with them.
Yep. So,
there are no clinicians on juries. There are no physicians on juries, no dental hygienists, no malpractice insurance executives. So the chart's everything. Conversely, if the doctor had gone through and charted these things, they're etched in stone.
Right. And your only defense, really, right? Documentation.
It's the 11th commandment. Okay. If they're there, the jury will believe them.
Yep. So it sounds like right off the bat, so we've covered two so far. And the first is the importance of the communication and the relationship with the patient, right? There's trust, there's relationship. So you can kind of argue that some of these patients who had a justifiable reason to sue the dentist chose not to based on the fact that they trust and have a relationship with that dentist. And more importantly to that, in the communication side with the dentist, is the dentist's, and this is a tricky one because, you hear things in lawsuits from other people that one of the things that they say is like, don't apologize to the patient, because if you apologize to the patient, that is in essence kind of admitting guilt. But it sounds like in like the scenario that you gave us with this dentist that actually did the wrong tooth on, George Foreman number 5, basically, even though that apology does admit guilt to some degree, and that's arguable, it also builds a lot of relational equity with the patient to restore that trust, correct the problem, and make it right, which may actually benefit the dentist as well. But I understand that's probably a very slippery slope. So there might be different scenarios where maybe you go one way or you go the other. I mean, it's hard to say. So the first one is communication. The second one is documentation.
Well, let me address what you just said real quick.
Yes, please. Because I could be on the show right now and it's like, oh, you can't give legal advice. And I'm not, for the record.
An apology is different than admitting guilt. Okay. So one of the things I like to tell dentists, my 3 generalized traits of dentists are they're extraordinarily compassionate people, and I believe that. They do not like conflict whatsoever, which keeps me gainfully employed. And C, they are absolute perfectionists. They are harder on themselves than anybody else. So what I like to tell dentists, or not tell them, remind them, is dentistry, like medicine, is an imperfect science. Until the dental gods determine all treatment must be perfect, there is going to be human error. human error is not necessarily negligence or malpractice.
Okay,
In
that's
other
good.
words,
Good
bad
perspective.
things happen in absence of negligence. Just because the result isn't 100% satisfactory to the patient doesn't mean the dentist did anything wrong.
Hmm.
And like I said, dentists tend to be harder on themselves than anybody else. So if there is a shortcoming in treatment, it's okay to explain what happened. It's okay to be somewhat somber or apologetic about it. It's not okay to say, boy, I really screwed that up.
Yeah.
It's not okay to say I committed malpractice.
Yeah. Well, obviously, that'd probably be a really bad one to say. So, but again, goes back to that the communication with the patient, and then reinforces what you just said, the documentation on the patient, right? So, one of the questions I have for you is, there's a lot of dentists out there, and we've got dentists that are generalists, and we have dentists that are specialty, right? Is there, in your opinion, are we seeing that across the board, there's really no trend between generalists and specialists? Or do we see that generalists get sued more, or are we seeing that specialists get sued more? And then my question is if there is a difference between the two, why is one finding themselves in more lawsuits than the other? Does that make sense?
It does. So
what do you think?
Let me comment on it generally. So this large company that did this study that we talked about earlier determined that 86.7% of lawsuits were against general dentists, not specialists.
Wow.
Now, in fairness, there's a lot more general dentists than there are specialists.
Right.
Okay. And I want to make it very clear that I am not saying general dentists shouldn't do specialty work. Okay. Dentistry is different than medicine, where dentists, generally speaking, are fully licensed to do anything and everything that a specialist can do. Okay. For example, you don't see an OBGYN doing knee surgery, for example. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
But in dentistry, it's more open than that. Now, that said, you've heard the saying, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So how I advise dentists is to know your limitations. For example, if you like to do extractions, maybe you refer out bony impacted wisdom teeth. If you like to do endo, maybe you refer out molar endos. Know what you can do and what you can't do. I'll tell you, Grant, in my experience, the most successful, most stable general dental practices are comprised of dentists that do what they like and what they do well.
Okay. So a question then is, if we're seeing that dentists are getting sued for sometimes going outside the scope of what they do really well, I guess the question I ask with that in consideration is why would a generalist put themselves at risk and go outside their, let's just call it their comfort zone, okay, for sake of conversation here. So do you find that they're being motivated by money because this is a higher paying procedure? I think a lot of these dentists are responsible people. As you said, they're kind of perfectionists. They want to do well. So why would they put themselves in a position to do procedures they're not comfortable with?
Well, that's a question where I can only speculate the answer. I think
that's okay. You're a content expert. We're
I think
your speculation's good.
I think certainly money's part of it. I think they enjoy it. For example, there's a dentist I know that lived in Eastern Oregon. He's retired now. That was a general dentist, but he loved doing root canals, endo. And in fact, since there wasn't a specialist, within probably 50 to 100 miles of his city that did endodontics, a lot of dentists referred to him for endo. He was excellent. He was probably as good as most endodontists.
Okay.
I can tell you, I never had a claim with him. And so they like it. There are a lot of dentists that enjoy doing extractions in perio. And ortho is a big one where you see general dentists. And so my whole thing is do what you like to do. Just know when you should refer it out. Because here's the other thing, Grant.
Mm-hmm.
If a general dentist is doing specialty work and they get sued because of a potential malpractice issue,
mm-hmm.
the expert for the plaintiff, for the patient, is always going to be a specialist in that field. So I'll just say oral surgery. So if a dentist extracts a tooth and severs a nerve, the plaintiff's attorney is going to bring in an oral surgeon to testify against the general dentist. And an oral surgeon is always going to say, I have more experience. It should have been this way, not the way he did it, and I wouldn't have severed the nerve. And of course, the jury's going to say, well, yeah, that probably should have gone to a specialist.
I mean, I guess that's arguable, but you just gave a great example here of, somebody that was rural, right? Where it's a 100-mile drive for them to get this same treatment somewhere else, right? So, but I would imagine even in that situation, they probably bring a specialist in to do exactly what you're talking about is, well, why didn't you drive 100 miles to this specialist? And now the specialist is, kind of putting this generalist into a position that's very uncomfortable for everybody. But we still see probably dentist generalists doing specialty stuff in urban areas where a specialist is readily available. The generalist still decides to do it. Maybe they're great at their craft, or they want to do, they like doing these things as you suggested. But have you had any experience with dentists in the past that are generalists that have done specialty stuff? And is there a scenario where they are doing specialty stuff and I don't really want to do this, but I'm doing it? And is there a reason behind that? Are they feeling any pressure on themselves to do it? Or are they feeling pressure from an employer or maybe a DSO? Or, I mean, do you see, or have you heard of that happening in the past?
Well, there's two scenarios I can talk about. One, the DSOs aren't going to like very much, but I have over the past, it was more pre-COVID than now, but say over the past 3-4 years, I've received dozens and dozens of calls. I mean, more calls than I can count, Grant, from dentists working for DSOs in the Northwest that feel like their employer forced them to do treatment that they didn't feel qualified to do. And they asked me, they said, what should I do? And the answer is, I don't really know if that's what you're
right.
saying. However, I will tell you, if you have an issue, if you have a negligence issue or a complaint by a patient to the dental board, it's your license. So an excuse to the board or an excuse in court isn't, well, I told my employer I wasn't qualified to do it.
Right.
Interestingly, I've actually asked dentists to have their employer call me. I would be glad to talk to them about the risk management or the potential negligence that's involved here. So, it's not my intent to bash DSOs, but those are real stories. The other story or scenario in that case is a dentist refers somebody out, and let's just say to get their wisdom teeth extracted. And the first question the patient often asks the dentist is, well, is it more expensive if I go to a specialist? And of course, the answer is yes.
Which is very reasonable and probably a very common question patients will have, right?
Yeah, it happens all the time. And by the way, I'm not suggesting that it shouldn't be more, okay? I don't get into fees. But my point to the dentist is, if you referred that patient out to a specialist, you did so because you didn't feel comfortable doing that procedure. Don't let the patient talk you into doing it just because they don't want to pay more. And again, if we had more time today, Grant, I could tell you a number of of malpractice claims where the dentist took the patient back, did the procedure, and ended up getting sued.
Because the patient talked them into it.
Yeah.
To save money. And again, kind of goes back to one of the things you said about dentists is they don't like confrontation, right? So it's like, well, I don't really want to do this, but I want this to be a happy patient. And I know I probably can do it against my better judgment. I mean, that's a really good point, because you probably wouldn't think that the patient would have that much sway with the dentist, being that the dentist is the content expert. They're the technician. They know their limitations. And yet a simple conversation or pressure from the patient, because they're trying to keep their costs down, would be enough to sway a dentist to kind of go against their better judgment and do something. And then wham, the next thing you know is there's a potential lawsuit, right? So,
well, remember, it's not just that they hate conflict. They're very compassionate people.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you, when I used to lecture at OHSU and UW School of Dentistry, haven't done that in a while because of COVID. One of the questions I always asked the students was, so how many, and I'd have 70 to 100 students in the lecture hall. And I'd say, how many of you got into dentistry for the money? Show of hands. And invariably, one or two people would raise their hands in a joking manner. Okay. and I always said, good, because if you get in this for the money, you're going to earn every penny the hard way. Dentistry is a very taxing job. It's hard. There's a reason why dentists make a good living. It's a hard job, and you have to love what you do. And so they really get into it because they want to help patients. And if a patient is begging them to do the procedure because they don't want to pay the extra money, or maybe even this particular dentist has a way of financing it that is favorable to the patient instead. The problem is that patient that loves you today is going to sue you tomorrow if they're not happy with the outcome.
And is it just the outcome, or, I mean, kind of going back to the money thing where the patients are pressuring a generalist to do a specialty surgery to save money? I mean, there's got to be, besides the outcome, there's got to be an element too in there of the money itself, right? It's not just trying to save money on the procedure, but are you running into situations where patients potentially have sued dentists in the past because they just simply, going back to the money thing, just because they simply don't want to pay their bill? Have you seen that before?
All the time.
Okay.
So money is frequently an underlying root cause of a claim. So we all know that dental insurance works a lot differently than medical insurance. It's capped at a relatively low max if somebody needs a lot of dental care.
Yep.
And in some dental insurance plans, they don't include ortho, they don't include implants, dentures, things like that. So the out-of-pocket cost can be extensive. And if the dentist is not very careful about explaining at least approximate out-of-pocket costs to the patient prior to treatment, it can be a huge problem. So what we recommend is when you, doctor, go through that treatment plan with the patient, you put the approximate out-of-pocket cost to the patient. In other words, what their financial responsibility is. And then you have them initial or sign that treatment plan. So there's no surprises.
Yeah, going back to, it's funny how these all loop together, right? That's going back to
they're all
communication, documentation, like putting all those things in writing so that one, because it's the right thing to do, but for the patient, because that's fair to the patient, but also being aware that, as you just said, it's like somebody that loves you today is the person that sues you tomorrow. Going back to that communication and documentation, it's like really, really important that these dentists really document really well what they're doing, including quotes on the price. So if that happens and like, wow, this is way too expensive, or I didn't see this coming, or I simply just can't afford it. So instead of like trying to figure out how to pay the dentist, I'm just going to sue the dentist to get rid of that bill. That documentation, again, is the saving grace for any practitioner to ensure that they can show that they communicated well with the patient, things were signed, things were documented so they can be presented in court. I just think it's so interesting that you're kind of talking about all of these scenarios where dentists have been sued, but they really come back this cyclical process of communication and documentation. And, the other part of it is staying within your comfort zone or what you're really, really good at, and don't push outside into specialties if that's not where you're comfortable. Right. So,
true. Grant, if I had $1 for every time a dentist said to me, boy, that's the last person I thought would sue me, we could be doing this interview on the beaches of Maui. Okay. So, yeah, it's just, you never know. You have to treat every patient the same.
No, this is incredible content. And the thing I love about, you take all of your experience, right? And years and years since 1997, and you mix it around, and what you're coming up with and what you're sharing in the show today is something very simple. Communication, documentation, staying within your specialty, and the aspect of money and things of that nature. Like, I just think it's interesting that even though you've got all these years of experience, it really comes back to some core principles that need to be practiced. And those dentists that don't practice these principles, which you would think would be kind of 101 stuff, but I guess that's where they get caught, right? Puts them in a situation they don't want to be in. So, one of the things I want to make sure that we do for the audience is we discussed this earlier, and I wanted to make sure that dentists who have questions about this show or questions about a scenario they're in have the opportunity to reach out to you. And, this is Chris Verbiest's email. And I'm going to leave it up for a second because there's so you can learn how to spell Verbiest.
It's a very common last name in Belgium.
Is it?
It is very uncommon here.
So if you have questions for Chris wanted to extend his email to you, cfverbiest, Verbiest @gmail.com. You can also reach out to Chris through HPA. So if you go to HPA's website, you can reach out to us, contact us, and say, hey, I'm a dentist. I'm in a situation that I might need some help on and some communication, bounce some ideas off of. We can help reach out with you to Chris to get you guys connected. But I just wanted to make sure that you knew how to reach Chris so that he can be a resource to you and get you the information you need to navigate the situation you're in. So, Chris, I really appreciate you being on the show with us today. Hopefully this was valuable to the doctors. Is there anything that you would want to leave with the doctors that are listening to this? Any advice that you would give them at this point based on what they've heard today?
Well, I would say know your limitations. Chart. I can't say it enough. Just one quick last point. I talk about informed consent, documentation, communication, every risk management class I do. And I was just doing one a few weeks ago. And a dentist said, Chris, you always come back and tell us this in some way the same thing. And I said, it's because I don't think you guys are hearing me. Okay. Once we don't have any of these issues anymore, I'll quit talking about it. And lastly, if anybody watching this video needs anything, I have all kinds of forms. I have all kinds of PowerPoint slides that I can help you with. Just email me and I'll get that stuff to you as quickly as I can. Thank you, Grant. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun, and I'll come back anytime.
Oh, I will have you back. This is just the tip of the iceberg, Chris. And I really appreciate you being on the show with us today. If you found this show to be valuable, we invite you again to subscribe to our channel. Click on the notifications icon so you can stay up to date on the topics we're doing at Real Docs, where we talk with real doctors, we talk about real topics, and we spotlight real solutions. Appreciate your time, Chris. Thank you again very much for being on the show.
Thank you much.